Hello and welcome to Reliable IT's Emergency Survival Guide webinar. The webinar will start here shortly. Just wanted to provide a brief reminder that if you've got questions that you'd like to put in front of the panel, please use the question box that's in the toolkit over on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll be taking questions throughout the webinar, so please do that at any time. Mike?
Thanks, Lance. Nice to see you guys. Thank you, Kelby, Chris, Karen, and Lance. Appreciate your time, and thanks for being a part of this. I first want to introduce Lance Godsworth. Lance and I have been, as you guys know, worked together for many, many years, almost close to 20 years now. And so real excited to certainly have him on board and for him to be our MC for, I guess, the rest of his life. So whether he likes it or not, he's going to be doing these forever. He hosts runs our summit that we have every year, and then he also runs these. So Lance Godsworth is our CXO for Reliable IT and principal consultant. He works with most of our clients in bringing healthcare expertise to bear. So Lance, go ahead and take it over.
All right, thanks, Mike. I appreciate it. And good morning. Good morning, everybody. And for those of you who are on the East Coast, I guess it's good afternoon at this stage. Welcome to the Emergency Survival Guide, the Executive Guide to Co-Managed IT webinar. My name is Lance Godsworth. As Mike said, for those of you who have not met me, I will be your MC today. We have a fantastic panel of speakers, and we expect each of you to walk away with something that is very valuable this morning. So please note, we'll be taking questions from the audience throughout the webinar. If you have questions for the panel, please submit them to the question box and we'll do our best to put them in front of the panel on your behalf. Please allow me to introduce you to our panelists for today's webinar. First is Chris Francis, a healthcare professional with 15 years of industry experience. He currently serves as the IT director at Panorama Orthopedics and Spine, where he oversees the day-to-day IT operations for the practice, as well as long-term strategic planning and implementation of technology-related projects. Chris is passionate about finding innovative IT solutions to increase efficiency, collaboration, and productivity for his practice. Next, we have Kelby Tardy, who is the Chief Financial Officer for the Tallahassee Orthopedic Clinic. As CFO, Ms. Tardy leads the organization's financial strategy and operations, including audit, financial reporting, shareholder relations, planning and analysis, tax functions, as well as oversight of the finance functions of the company. Our next panelist is Karen Clark. Karen has spent over 20 years as a healthcare CIO and now provides independent technology consulting to organizations helping to align technology with their strategic goals. Prior to beginning her career at Somerset CPAs and Advisors, Karen was the Chief Information Officer for Ortho Tennessee. She speaks nationally on topics of healthcare payment reform and cybersecurity and is passionate about transforming the use of health IT to better serve patients and providers. And finally, Mike Mcwilliams, Reliable IT's Chief Revenue Officer, has been in the technology industry for over 25 years. Mike has served as the CEO and CRO for many companies, and as CRO for Reliable IT, he is responsible for the overall sales and marketing strategy of the company. Mike has architected many solutions from the ground up, including cloud and on-premise strategies. Okay, enough from me. Let's get over to Mike and have him explain to us a little bit about what co-managed IT is, and then the panel is going to discuss that topic in greater detail. Mike?
Yeah, perfect, Lance. Thanks for your time. I have 99 slides to go over, so it should take about 50 minutes, and then we'll have 5 minutes of this lovely panel. I know you want to hear me more than them. If I go more than 3 minutes, somebody please turn me off. So we're going to go from there. So we've had a lot of conversation with groups all over the country asking us about, hey, what's the best solution? Is it in-house? Is it out-house? Is it co-managed? Is it, what version of it? And it's like, man, it's hard to tell because it's all about people. And so when you look at it, what we say is there's a new approach to securing IT support and it doesn't have to cost you an arm and a leg, and you can do it, and you don't have to hire it in-house. You can also look at hiring it in-house. There's lots of different solutions, but really there's multiple dilemmas out there. There's IT investments. How do you get the most out of your the equipment you have on-prem? Do you move to the cloud? Do you go to Azure? Do you go to AWS? Where do you go? And there's again, if you ask anybody, they'll probably have 5 or 6 different types of solutions for you. What about IT succession planning? We haven't talked a lot about that in healthcare, but again, specifically, again, in COVID, what if your IT person got sick and was out and about for 2 months? What are you going to do? You need to make sure and spread that risk. Does your IT department routinely work nights and weekends? I think that if they do, you need to really, really think about how much work they're doing, and do you have enough staff? Projects, are they getting done? Are they not getting done? Do you have risk assessment findings that are troublesome? Do you have better tools? A lot of organizations, when you look at it, you say, hey, I can only afford the tools that I can afford because I'm a 250, 350, 450 person shop, or a 50 person shop, or a 10 person shop. It's all in cost is in direct proportion to quality typically. And so what we find is that unfortunately, the more expensive tools, the better results. Now, again, that's not 100% accurate all the time, but again, in general, it is. So what is co-managed IT? It is not, and again, read that bottom one first. It's not replacing your IT. Co-managed IT is a concept of getting a slice of what you need when you need it. Do you need a firewall expert? Do you need a network expert? Do you need a systems expert? I had somebody the other day ask me saying, hey, do you have, kind of an all-inclusive type of engineer? And we're like, no, we don't. Not anymore. We have people that are specific, and it's even worse than that. We have people that are specific in Azure. We have specific people that are on-prem solutions, Exchange, Office 365. It really is extremely, extremely niched, and we like that because then we can bring, again, the right slice to bear. How do growth practices solve this dilemma? Again, it's about do not replace your IT staff. It makes them better. It helps with succession planning, all those things that we already talked about before. And so that's the goal of this. And I have asked this panel to come together to kind of give you a flavor of, hey, what are the good and the bad of doing it? Why would you do it? Is there a reason to do it? And here's some quick scenarios, which I think you already kind of got. Is your in-house staff better served at working at high-level strategic projects? Are they good at that and not necessarily good at the day-to-day? Are they better at the day-to-day and not getting a lot of the projects done? Forgive me on that third slide. Should be your practice. But is your healthcare practice scaling up? Is there compliance issues? Are you hey, we're in a growth mode. We're going out and acquiring 2 or 3 new practices on a consistent basis. And hey, I have an excellent IT team, but I don't have the great tools. I don't have the tools that are going to help us get to that next stage so that it takes care of a lot of the day-to-day aspect. So really, those are the areas where it makes sense. Lots of different reasons, and this panel is going to kind of share with you what's good, what's bad, what they like, what they don't like, and go from there. So, Lance, I'm going to hand it back to you. I'm out. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. That was very helpful. It's always good to level set before you begin to have the definitions of what you're talking about before you start talking about it. So now let's open for the panel discussion. One last reminder, please go ahead and submit questions as you come up with them, and we'll squeeze those in as quickly as we can. Let's get started with Kelby. Kelby, tell me, why did you choose a co-managed IT solution for your practice?
Yeah, so we went with a co-managed solution probably 8 or 9 years ago. And as you heard in the intro, I'm on the finance side. I'm not an IT person. Chris and Karen are way better at that than I am. They have the expertise. So I kind of was put in charge of IT, and not having that area of expertise and switching to a new EHR system about 9 or 10 years ago, we realized that we just didn't have the skill set that we needed in our staff. We had great staff. They were very loyal, hardworking, but they just did not have the expertise they needed to keep the servers running, started, dealing with security issues and stuff like that. And so even though it was a financial decision, we really did it more for the increased quality that we needed and increased security issues that we needed to have addressed. So since then, we have moved to another company, and for us, it's been a very good solution for our organization.
Okay, very good. Thanks, Kelby. Chris, let's move over to you. I know you were part of the team that helped make the selection to move to a co-managed IT process. Talk to me about why that decision was made from your perspective, as well as maybe some of the benefits and maybe some of the challenges of a co-managed IT solution.
Yeah, I think when we were ready to make that transition, we had struggled with advancing the practice from an IT perspective. All of our leadership said, hey, IT seems to be getting in the way of me being able to execute projects effectively and efficiently. And when we looked at that, we said, well, it's because we're not finding quality team members, right? We weren't a large enough IT team to attract the level of talent that we wanted moving forward. And so outsourcing IT allowed us to have somebody else attract that talent and pull from, the entire nation instead of just our specific region to support the teams. We also needed to move from old historical architecture and IT philosophies to more modern solutions to allow us to scale and move faster. We didn't feel we had that expertise in-house. We felt outsourcing that was critical. We did keep a portion of our IT in-house. Some of our critical systems we did keep in-house. So we do have both, outside IT support for managed services as well as some infrastructure pieces. But then our EMR systems and our phone systems and stuff, we manage support for those things and direct end user support internally.
Very good, very good. Karen, I would like to rephrase that question for you. Maybe what you could tell me is, what do you think the greatest benefit of a co-managed IT approach is, and what's the greatest challenge of a co-managed IT approach?
Well, I think the way Kelby and Chris have already indicated is there's generally some sort of trigger event that makes people think about outsourcing or partially outsourcing their IT. Either they've taken a look at their practice expense, or they're adopting a new EHR, or they need a big hardware upgrade, and there's some sort of trigger event. But I would like to ask our listeners to not necessarily wait for one of those trigger events. IT is one of those things that can kind of bump along in the background, and as long as things are working, it tends to work sometimes in the shadows of the organization. But what's happening, whether you realize it or not, is all of us are moving more and more to a hybrid on-prem, cloud-hosted assortment of applications. And unless you've been very diligent about improving the skill sets of your staff, you may have a mismatch between the skill set in your staff, which was perfectly appropriate for what you had in-house 8 years ago, and isn't quite exactly a good fit. So I say one of the first things to do is don't wait until you think you need it to do an assessment of whether it's a good plan for you. The other good thing about doing something like this as a hybrid, co-managed, is you can have access to very specific skill sets. Kind of an obvious one is cybersecurity. Very few practices, none that I know, have a full-time, 24/7, 3-man security operations center managing all of their inbound and outbound packet traffic. That just doesn't happen in a medical practice. So, and you typically don't have that expertise. That's a perfect example of using a co-managed service to help you in that area. The caveats, or the things where I would put up a yellow caution sign, is you have to be very intentional about what is appropriate to put outside the walls of your organization and what isn't. And a good example is you have to pay a lot of attention to latency. A good example of a cloud-hosted application is email. right? Office 365 or G Suite, whatever you use, because email is not sensitive to latency. If an email arrives 4 or 5 minutes later than it should, typically no one even knows, and it certainly doesn't matter. But if you had a 4-minute delay between clicks checking in patients at the front desk, that would be disastrous. It'd be a catastrophe. So one of the things you have to think about is the application you're using well suited to being hosted elsewhere? Are you still running a client server SQL-based application? Well, you need to know that. And if you're going to do that, it's not as simple as picking an outsourced vendor. You also have to look at your in-house infrastructure, because if you're going to rely on a server sitting 50 miles away or 100 miles away, do you have redundant internet connections? Are your switches and routers up to speed? Is your internal wiring fast? Because you don't want to put this somewhere where it's a great place to host it, but then your folks can't get to it quickly. So I would say not all applications are well suited, and it takes some really good homework and investigation to make sure you're putting your foot right. It's not just picking the vendor.
Very good. Thanks, Karen. I appreciate that. So Kelby, let's slide back to you real quick. When you were looking at kind of dividing and conquering, if you will, hey, we're going to keep this piece and we're going to keep outsource this piece, what was your greatest concern about moving into sort of a co-managed solution?
Well, I think, part of it for us was location, like Karen said, where are the servers located? How are they going to be managed? Who is going to manage what? And to be honest, when we went through this the first time, we had some gaps. We had some things that weren't really being handled by anybody. And so, that was a big thing. And so the kind of the analysis of your network and your infrastructure and how that's happening, who's handling that. We didn't have a good feel for that, but those were the things that we were kind of trying to handle.
Okay, great. Chris, what was your greatest concern going into that new co-managed relationship?
Yeah, I think our biggest concern, frankly, was the end user experience. We were used to having immediate access to our support team. So if a staff member or a doctor needed something, somebody came over and interacted with them in person. And so that was really important for us to maintain. And so going to a co-managed solution, that was a requirement from whomever we partnered with, that we do have some of their expertise on site to continue that level of support while fixing all the other back end stuff that really is not as visible to the end users and the leadership of the organization.
Very good, very good. And in a follow-up, so you feel like, was that perceived as a success, or was there a gap there for the immediate access?
For us, I think it was perceived as a success. One of the challenges we ran into immediately before making the transition is we had a hard time keeping our tier 1, tier 2 support folks on staff. We experienced probably 200 to 300% turnover in those positions in the year prior to going to co-managed. Since we've done that, of course, we've still experienced turnover, but the impact is significantly less on our end users. So there's consistency around the level of support that they're receiving. Turnaround times have increased or decreased, I guess, as well, right? So the service is a little bit faster than what we were providing internally.
Terrific. I appreciate that. Thank you for that clarification. Karen, let me ask you a question. I think that we are represented, Kelby and Chris both come from fairly large practices. You come from a fairly large practice, but I know you're out consulting with smaller practices as well. Is there an optimal size or composition of practice that should be considering a co-managed solution in your mind?
I would say that the co-managed solutions would differ by the size of the practice. For example, going to what Chris was talking about having on-site help desk people. In most medical practices, your help desk people are fielding questions not about purely technical things, I can't log in or I can't print, but they're answering questions. How do I print a prescription? Why can't I import this patient record? And so having on-site, so that they're doing more than just pure tech support. And I think it's really important to realize the things that your in-house people are doing. They know that when Dr. Johnson calls, he forgets his password every month and they have to reset it, and they kind of know that. They know when Mary in medical records calls, she can never figure out how to import something from a thumb drive. So they kind of know that, and that really helps smooth things along. And that kind of institutional knowledge can get lost. So I really want to echo what Chris said about you've got to have people on site who know your people, your doctor, your staff, your workflows, because the questions that come in are not simply technical questions. They're not open a ticket kind of questions. And sometimes it's a ticket from the floor and they need an answer right now because the poor nurse is standing there, the doc's having a bad hair day, everybody's upset, and they just need somebody who can help them now and not, put in a ticket, we'll get back to you in 24 hours. So I would say for smaller practices, it's even more important to be strategic about how you allocate your resources. So if you're a smaller practice, you say, we know we have to be covered on cybersecurity. We've got nobody who can handle that. So that's kind of an easy thing to outsource. We know, certainly if there's anybody on this webinar who's still hosting their own email server, please call any one of us immediately. So you should stop that right away. So there's some things that are just easy to outsource and get that weight off the neck of your internal staff. And then maintain the things internally where that local control, local institutional knowledge is really key to success. So I'd say there's no one size fits all, but we all know that more and more applications are moving to either co-managed solutions, like the kind of thing Reliable IT offers, or more and more vendors are offering a cloud-based version of their application. And sometimes that's the best mix. If I'm running Kronos Workforce Central for time and attendance, does it make sense for me to host my Kronos server at a co-managed IT shop like yours? Or does it make sense for me to move to Kronos's cloud-based version? And I would say the answer to that is how reliant are you on it? How important is latency? Could you still see patients and do business if it was down for an hour? I mean, these are the kind of questions you have to ask. Typically with an outsourced IT arrangement, as you would have with Reliable IT, you've got a lot more control. I would say one more thing before I stop is that when you choose to use a vendor's, in the Kronos example, you choose to use their cloud hosted version of their time and attendance system. The updates just come. They update it when they update it with no notice to you. And for some things like email or time and attendance, that's probably fine. But we all know that we can't walk into our practice on Monday morning with some big change to the way we check in patients with no notice. I mean, that would be, that would be a bad Monday. So in areas like that where you really have to have control over updates and changes to your environment, then that would make sense to work with an outsourced operation like yours rather than just going with the vendor's cloud hosted version. Okay, so control, great. I would say, is the big byword.
Great, I like that. That's a good answer. Kelby and Chris, I know you have both been in the orthopedic industry for a few years, and you're both influencers. So you probably get asked this question. I want to ask you both that same question. Kelby, let's start with you. Do you feel like there is a right size, or hey, this size of group should consider this type of solution, while this, bigger group might consider this type of solution? Do you have an opinion on that?
I think it's a little bit cultural. I don't know that it's a size issue, but I think there's a cultural issue too. If you're in an organization that like mine, where you have a non-IT person kind of managing IT, versus in a situation where you may have a CIO who knows all the technical background and knows all that, I think that, like Karen said, that may weigh your decision on the minimal outsourcing versus, more like we've done. But also the location you're at, like Chris mentioned, with turnover and where we're at, we've got a lot of college kids graduating, but they're moving off. And so we don't have as much of a population of people that can support some of those high level functions that we're doing. And the other thing, I think, we're in healthcare. I mean, we've just been slow to adopt some of the technology and security systems and all of that everybody else, in every other industry has adopted. And so, I really think it's a little of all of those things rather than the size of the group. I mean, we're, 27, we're about to be 31 here, but I don't know that we would, even as we grow larger, even if we got somebody, of a CIO level person, that we would make drastic changes at this point.
Very good. Very good. Chris, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think the other side of it too, right? Any modern CIO really is acting and has to think strategically more like a CEO, right? What is really going to add revenue to your systems, decrease your overall costs, all of that. And I think that has to play into whatever strategy you use to say, do I go software as a service, co-managed? How much of this do I hold on to on site? I also think it's really, really important to bring your financial teams in, right? As a healthcare organization, we know cash flow can be challenging at some times. And so does it help you to have a large capital expense of bringing equipment on site, and then over the years, it maybe saves you some money? Or does your institution for certain things need to balance that out and have a predictable monthly spend for services or not, right? If you don't plan those things out, I think when it does come time to do an upgrade of on-prem solutions, if you're not actively working with your financial teams, you may not get project approval. Mm-hmm. And then now you're not delivering updated systems at the frequency that your practice needs.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Very good. Okay. Mike, we haven't talked to you yet. I'm going to let you weigh in on this subject, if you don't mind. Do you have an opinion about the size of group or the composition and what's the optimal makeup of a group that should be considering co-managed IT?
Unfortunately, I don't, that's a really hard question to answer because there is no right answer for any group. But I will say, generally speaking, that what we find is that, you are, the IT group is required to operate at an extremely, extremely high level. And I haven't met one group yet that has it all figured out. As Karen stated, security is an issue. Hey, taking advantage of Azure or AWS and having that experience and the migration and being able to say, I've done 100 of these or 200 of these. I know about getting the ability to have two different internet service providers come into your building so that you can have access in case one of them goes down. That is not, simple. It's complicated. And so making sure that you have the right expertise at the right time is extremely important. So I would say that it is even reliable IT. We don't have all the expertise, and we even have to outsource sometimes. So it's interesting that, we're a 75-person shop, and we don't have it all. And so, and I know, Kelby, if I remember correctly, we've got 4 IT people, correct, on site? Yeah. And so if I don't got it figured out, I'm not sure how an organization of any size really can have that figured out. And I also think it's like, well, sometimes even though you can do it, meaning I can do desktops, I'm a one-person shop. I've got 100 people to handle. I'm a one-person shop. I can do it all. Why? You're not being strategic to the organization. I guarantee you, if you are a one-person shop and you are handling everything, you're not strategic because you're getting called in. And I'm guaranteed. Do you really want to do that? I can't wait to do Patch Tuesday, or I can't wait to go and do desktop support. There are more efficient and probably less expensive items, and there's probably more strategic projects that could be getting done if you were able to concentrate. But you got to get those other things off the table. And so, great place to outsource the low end, the high end, let you handle the middle, doing things of that nature.
Very good. All right. Thanks, Mike. All right. I'm going to reverse the cycle. Chris, you're next. You already have a co-managed IT solution. We know that. What would you recommend for a methodology to oversee the co-managed environment? What, as a practice administrator, how should I oversee that?
I think it's really valuable to, if your organization can afford to have somebody on staff that is dedicated to managing all of your technology vendor relationships, right? I mean, your executive team needs to lead the organization and deal with the overall strategy of the entire business, and managing vendor relationships from a technology perspective can be challenging at times and is critical to the overall success of IT in your organization, right? None of us want IT to become the black box of death where projects go to die, right? But we all want to avoid that. Frankly, IT should be in the background, right? It should not have a negative impact on your end users or how they perform care or perform billing cycles or anything else. And so having somebody that's dedicated to that internally, I think has been critical to our success. I think it also speeds up some ownership and some project management. And then you have somebody that has your organization as the primary beneficiary versus, hey, unfortunately in Kelby's case, where she has to deal with managing those IT vendors, right? That takes her away from her prime objectives. And if a relationship is going south with an IT vendor, I think it could slow down how you resolve that and move on.
Very good. Thanks, Chris. Karen, you had a comment?
Yeah, I couldn't agree with Chris more, because one of the things that can happen when you have people without a technical background managing IT vendors, it's very hard for them to know if the vendor's sort of shading the truth a little bit. And I would say there are two areas. If you are a non-technical person who is charged with managing this stuff, I would say two things. And later on, I'd like to talk about an RFP for these services. But when you're preparing an RFP for these services, if you don't have a technical background, you need to identify what you need operationally and financially. And then you need to bring in someone who is not going to bid on the project, who helps you write the technical RFP. So the RFP is written in specific technical language, but it's written to your needs. And then you put that out for bid with the various people you're talking about. Because it's very easy to get lost in all these acronyms of AWS and Azure and Office 365. It all sounds great, but at the end of the day, if it doesn't do what you need it to do, it's useless. And at the same time, if you can have a Chris Francis on staff to hold these guys accountable, awesome. If you can't, it's probably worth it to once a quarter, twice a year, have someone come in, look at your contracts, look at what they're doing. Are they doing the patches? Are they doing upgrades? Have they tested the backups? All the things that people without a technical background really don't know to look at. And so you could have a lot of problems bubbling under the surface and not know it. And I'm not saying that any of these vendors would do it intentionally or on purpose. It's just people get busy and stuff gets overlooked. But at the end of the day, it's your neck if you can't log into your practice management system and produce a claim. And so just make sure that if you don't have the benefit of a Chris Francis full-time, you get a part-time Chris Francis, who can come in and basically audit is what it is. It's basically an audit a couple of times a year and just make sure you're on track. Because otherwise, I don't know, as a non-technical person, I don't know how you even read one of these proposals, really.
Sure. I love it. Kelby, you haven't spoken to this subject yet. What are your thoughts on oversight?
Yeah, to Karen's point, all that stuff is gibberish in those RFPs, right? Because I don't know what any of that stuff is. So,
right.
I mean, for me and the way, I manage it here is, we've got some technical people on staff. And so while they may not know the exact details, they're kind of the canary in the coal mine to me. If there's a problem, they can say, this isn't going right. I don't know what it is. And so then I can kind of dig in a little bit. And while I don't have the technical background, I think I'm kind of level-headed enough to say that something's not right here and explain it and that kind of thing. And I think the other thing is your users, right? Like Karen said, I mean, if they can't log in, if they're having constant problems, there's a problem. And so, you use those people as kind of your canary in the coal mine. But I agree with Karen. I mean, you have to have somebody with a little bit of oversight to make sure that everything is going right, because things change and they're set up one way, and 3 years from then things have changed, and maybe some setting that was really important is now, got changed, and it's inadvertent, but it opens you up to some risk. So, and I think that goes both ways for both your co-managed vendor, but also your internal IT people, because they can make changes in the same way and nobody knows about it, and then all of a sudden you're exposed, or they didn't take something seriously and lock something down, and now you have some exposure there. So it kind of needs to go a little bit both ways on that, I think.
Yeah.
Very good. Thanks, Kelby. So there was another point that Karen brought up that I want to refocus on, if you don't mind, and that is, if you're seeking out a solution, and she mentioned the RFP is one option for how to proceed on that. Chris, let's start with you. If you want to vet a new potential co-managed IT partner, what would you recommend to the audience? What are some key factors in how to vet a new potential partner?
I think you have to go back to what Karen originally said too. Understand what you need as an organization operationally first, right? I think it's also important to understand what is your strategy moving forward. Is your company in a state where, hey, we're going to refocus on internal operations and create efficiencies there, right? Because that potentially has a different need than, we're gearing up to grow, right? If you're gearing up to grow, then you need to partner with a vendor that has proven tactics in growth and flexibility in growth. How quickly can I grow or not to adapt to my market demands? And so you have to define, I think, those two pieces, right? Basic gap analysis, right? What's my current state? What do I want in the future? And now I need to write my RFP to get me there, right? And then, frankly, you need to revisit that every 2-3 years at a minimum.
Very good. Kelby, could you address that same question?
Yeah, I mean, the RFP, again, I think, we would bring in people from our technical team to help with that as well. And then I think you have to talk to other people that have gone this route as well, whether it's references with the vendors that you're talking to as well. I think that's very important because, sometimes you find out that maybe they're not as, they can't do what they say that they could do for you, or not as efficiently, or whatever. And if you can get some information on the inside operations of it, that's even better, because some firms have a lot of turnover, just like we do in our practices. And so those things are important as to the quality of, help that you're going to get. So I think as much digging as you can do outside of the RFP process, the better as well.
Okay, very good. Very good. So Karen, once you've selected 2 or 3 different groups that you think are candidates for a co-managed IT solution or one component of your system, how do you go about deciding which is the best one, which is the one I'm going to go forward with?
The beauty contest, my favorite part. Well, I think what you need to do is make sure that you understand all of the costs. So for example, vendors typically propose on those things that they control and they're providing to you. But of course, what matters to you is the entire process. So you can say, all right, Lance, I'm going to hire your company, but my requirement is less than 14 milliseconds of latency before I'll go with it. And Lance says, well, I can't possibly guarantee that until we take a look at your internal switches and all your internet connections. And then you can say, okay, so let's look at that. Because if I have to upgrade my internet connections and I have to buy new upgraded switch equipment and I have to move from an electrical interface to an optical interface, that's part of the cost of the proposal. So I would say, first of all, make sure you understand the entire cost of the proposal. The second thing I would really want to talk to them about is response time. Put in a ticket, we'll call you back in 24 hours. Is great if Chris or I can't print. It's not great if physicians can't look at an x-ray. So there's got to be the bat phone. You know, there has to be the, in case of emergency, break glass, I need somebody right now kind of stuff. Because one of the things sometimes, I know we've talked about having on-site IT people, and I think that's really key. When people are too far removed from the pointy end of the stick, they lose the sense of urgency. So I talk a lot about response time. I would talk a lot about scheduled updates and downtime to make sure that there's got to be very structured change management so that absolutely nothing changes in your environment unless you know about it, can weigh in on it and approve it and can be prepared for it. One of the things we've talked about before, Lance, is doing small upgrades or patches on a Thursday night because Fridays are typically slower in the clinic, but it's a real day. So if they're going to be a problem, you can flush them out on Friday. You have all weekend to correct them if you hit something, and you don't have that happen on a Monday morning. So having control over how it is affecting you operationally, because I've got news for you, the doctors don't care where it is. They just know they can't log in. So whatever else is somebody else's problem. So and really make sure you understand all of the cost, because I think that very often gets forgotten and everybody's excited and we write the big contract and we put it in and then it's slow as dirt. And now we find out, oh, wait, we need to spend another $150,000 upgrading our wide area networking and data circuits. So make sure you understand it all at once. And Chris?
Yeah, the other thing I would add in there too, when you talk about change management, make sure you outline the change management process that your selected vendor has when they change vendors. What does that do to your systems, right? If they're changing their hosting provider or they're changing the tools that they're using, right? What's the potential impact to your business and your project flow? I would say, how do you manage that? Because that is something that, frankly, it's risk that is a little bit outside of your control if things don't go well, but has an impact on your business. And if you don't have a direct contract with that company, you may not, if something happens, you may not be able to get any reparations for downtime, right? If I was to host my EMR through my EMR provider and they hosted AWS and AWS has an outage, right? Well, I don't have a contract with AWS, and so I can't go after them to recoup some of the money lost because I was down for a day, right? And if my EMR vendor says, sorry about it, we don't have anything in our agreement to deal with, now what do you do? How do you manage that risk as a company? So I think that's really important to outline on the front end of vendor selection.
And are they providing you with regular reporting? And I do mean monthly reporting on all activity that's happening on your system, all patches, all updates, all reported problems, all corrected problems, so that you have full visibility into what's going on in your systems.
Yep, very good, very good. We do have a question that came in from the audience that I want to get in front of you guys real quick. Kelby, let's start with you. So let's say I have chosen my outsourcing vendor, my co-managed vendor. What kind of benchmarks are you using to evaluate or measure performance of that particular vendor?
Yeah, I mean, in general, we're looking obviously at downtime. That, usually that's something that's in the contract that's tangible. And so we look at, downtime. We're looking at if our user has a problem right now, they're sending it to our IT team internally. And then if our IT team can't resolve it, then they're escalating it to our co-source vendor. And so we're looking at, working together with them on how quickly are they resolving those tickets. If it's an issue that needs, an update or a patch or something else, then we're looking at, are those things getting done? So I think those are probably, from our perspective, we're looking at that. Obviously, everybody's doing a security risk assessment, in this day and age. And so I think, we're looking at that as well as an additional tool to make sure, again, sometimes we miss things, sometimes they miss things, and it comes out, to light in that. So we're looking at that as well and making sure everybody's kind of keeping us, our information safe and secure.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kelby. Chris, I know Panorama prides itself on being data-driven. Talk to me about benchmarking for this type of service at Panorama.
Sure. I think any outsourced or co-managed vendor is going to come to you with some KPIs that they like, right? That they're good at, that they measure. I think those are valuable for you to have, right? Some are going to overlap, right? Service level agreements, all of those pieces. I think when you're doing your RFP, I think you actually need to identify some of those KPIs, right? How do you measure? How do you assess the value of those vendors? I think quality of service, right? End user satisfaction is critical, right? An SLA may say, hey, a standard SLA, if I submit a normal support ticket, it's 2 to 3 days for response, not resolution. So time to resolution, I think, is what our practices truly care about, not necessarily just time to response. And so I think you have to identify those pieces early on and talk to all of your end users. What are their pain points, and how do you measure against those existing pain points? And then do surveys throughout the year. I'm gonna say, hey, if IT could fix 2 things, what would it be for you right now? Or, how do you prioritize some of your project load that doesn't impact negatively your service load? And how do you measure project delivery, right? Are they delivering on time? Are they delivering as expected? Are the outcomes what you need them to be? And I think a lot of that has to do with just surveying your staff and your leadership about the quality of service they're receiving.
Very good. Very good. Thanks, Chris. Karen, I know that in your time, you've outsourced a number of different solutions. How did you benchmark performance for those vendors in your past?
Well, I think you have to be careful what you get, what you measure. So if you say, I'm going to measure how quickly you close a ticket, that can incentivize a help desk system to say, well, call the user back, couldn't reach him, close the ticket. You can end up inadvertently incentivizing not the behavior you want. So some of the KPIs kind of tag on what Chris said was we would measure time to first response. And for us, it was 30 minutes, 45 minutes, or an hour or greater. And then time to resolution based on due date. Because Chris might call and say, look, I can't print envelopes on this stupid new printer, but as long as I get it done by next week, I'm fine. In which case the due date is, the end of June. But Kelby might call and go, holy crap, I can't print an envelope and the doctor's thing has to go to the university today. So that's printing an envelope, and one is an urgent thing with a due date of right now, and the other one has a due date of end of the month. So I think you measure how quickly those things are resolved to the user's satisfaction on the due date. I would also put in some internal KPIs that are not visible to the end users, but that we know are very important. I want to know when the last time these servers were patched, updated, antivirus. When's the last time you did a restore test of my backup, and let me see the results of that test. Let me tell the last time you did a scan. I want to see if there are any CRC or other hardware errors on the SAN that you're running for me. I want to see latency reports. This is all kind of geeky backdoor stuff, but if you are watching it and you're requiring a report, that's going to help keep your vendor on his toes. And again, I don't want to sound like people aren't doing it on purpose. It's just that which gets measured gets done. And so
No,
I would measure all those things that we know are critical to the health of the system and keep it peppy. And then the big thing for me is response time. I mean, that is the #1 user complaint, is it's too slow. And so I think you have specific benchmarks about response time, and if you're not hitting them, you got to figure out why. The problem is somewhere. And so I would say that's, at least, I don't know, Chris and Kelby, if that's what you all hear, but that's the #1 thing. It takes too long, it's slow. I get the spinning wheel, you know.
very good.
I like
Thank
to
you,
make my
Karen.
mistakes fast.
Thank you, Karen. I appreciate it. All right, so we're getting close to time to wrap up. I think we've got time to go around the horn with one more question. Mike, I actually want to start with you on this. I know that Karen mentioned security being a concern and being something that has good fractional solutions. What do you think, a practice that's considering a co-managed solution, that doesn't really need a full-time person that does this, or, they don't need a dedicated resource. What do you think the #1 need is, and how do you solve it?
Oh boy, I call it the 5 lines of defense, but the first one is specifically a security awareness training. I think that is probably, if you can prevent your users. Again, the biggest thing that we have right now is that end users will click on about anything, and we do phishing attacks on a consistent basis. And we even had an executive the other day that said, you know what, it's not fair. You sent me a Spotify email, and my kid just came in this morning and told me that he had to renew his Spotify account. And we actually had sent them a Spotify phishing email. And so he clicked on it, and it certainly boop, boop, big old red, and he had to do some more training. So I'd say security awareness training is probably it is dirt cheap to get and there's a couple of solutions out there, but there's one specifically that is very inexpensive, does a great job, and I would highly recommend that you spend the time. It's better to do that than being on the back end of a ransomware attack that encrypted your backups, and you don't know, it's going to take you 2 or 3 days to get everything back up and going. So I think security awareness training.
Who doesn't like a low-cost, high-impact solution? Good answer. Thank you. Chris, how about yourself? What do you think the #1 look for a fractional solution? Hey, I don't need a whole of this. I just need a piece of this. What is it?
I do think security is up there, and I think whenever you outsource anything, I think you need to have another disinterested third party audit whatever you just outsourced as well to make sure that the security measures are being met. I mean, frankly, security is constantly changing, and it's hard enough for companies that all they focus on is security to keep up with the constant changes and the new threats. So to have that internally is that would be really, really cumbersome, I think, at least for our organization to manage and stay abreast of all of the new pieces. So security would be the #1 thing that I would look at co-managing as well.
So Kelby, I'm going to save you for last. Karen, I'm going to make you say something that's not security. Is there something aside from security? And Kelby, that same question is coming to you, by the way. Is there something aside from security that you think lends itself to a more fractional solution in a good and healthy way?
The first one that comes to mind touches on security a little bit, but is email. Just because you shouldn't have your own Exchange server on site, period, and you shouldn't be hosting your own Exchange server with a co-managed partner. You should be using Office 365 or G Suite. The one thing I would caution the listeners about is Office 365 has many, many levels. There's E3, there's E5, there's Business Premium, there's all these different flavors. And there's a temptation to say, oh, look, let's go for the least expensive one. But the #1 way practices are compromised is through a business email compromise. And though I completely agree with Mike about the training, I think it's absolutely worth every penny. to put in guardrails and inspection of malicious links, so those bad links never, ever, ever get to our users in the first place. They just don't even get an opportunity to click on them. And that is money well spent. So it's a security thing, but I would also say that's the one thing you should outsource, because Microsoft's really good at mail. Google's really good at mail. That's something you just don't need to be managing the license, paying for, dealing with. And all of your end users will be happy, because no matter what mobile device they've got, you can make it work. So email, I would say.
I like it. Kelby, we've got time for one last response. Why don't you hit a home run for us? What would you have for our listeners?
Well, look, I agree with security is obviously a big thing, and email, I think, is the other thing. I mean, that was actually one of the issues when we first realized that we did not have the expertise. It was email, and somebody had clicked some button, and you could actually access everybody's email in the organization. And we were like, holy moly, this is like a big deal. And nobody knew what button was clicked or what button to unclick. And that was then that I realized that we've got to make some changes. And so, and I agree. I think there's people that specialize in email that can do it much better, much easier, much more inexpensive, and security. I mean, that was one thing, before we made our most recent change to our co-managed solution, that just kept me up at night. I mean, everybody's getting hit by breaches, Target and, LabCorp and all these big organizations. And so why are we, with much less resources, immune to that? And so that was a big thing that kept me up at night. It still does, but not to the same degree, that it did. So, I don't have anything new or innovative, but I mean, I agree with what everybody else said as well.
Very good.
I'm just
Thank
proud
you
of you for
much.
saying holy moly. That's
I
not
would have
what
said something else.
Okay, well, that's all our time for today. Thank you to everyone. Thank you to our panelists. Thanks for the attendees. Please note that there will be a brief survey following this, so you can tell us what you like, what you didn't like, and maybe what you'd like to hear about next time. Before you go, I know Mike has a few words for you. Mike?
Yeah, just really quick, again, thank you guys. Really appreciate it. Kelby, Chris, Karen did a great job. Lance, not bad. You're getting better at this thing. But I will say security is probably going to be our next webinar for July. And because we have been, I would say, doing a tremendous amount of security risk assessments, but more specifically, a lot of people have asked, how do hackers get in? So we are in the process of putting this together, a live hacking event, so that you can see exactly how hackers do it and stop wondering. And so we're trying to make it work in a webinar fashion. It's more of a live person event, but we're hoping it'll work. So anyway, we'll send out details later. Just wanted to share that quickly with you guys. So again, thank you for everybody, and have a wonderful day. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.